In this video, we're going to take a look at how we can create a NestJS microservice project using gRPC. So first things first, let's go ahead and install NestJS or update the CLI. So you can run an npm install to install this, and we can install this globally with the -g flag at nestjs/CLI. Now, if you already have it, they'll update it for you. Or if you don't have it, they'll install the NestJS CLI for you if you don't have it on your computer already. And you can go ahead and you can verify that you have it by running the nest-v to check which version of NestJS you have. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new project. And I'm in my NestJS folder, and I've got a few other folders here. So I'm just going to create another one. And we can use the Nest CLI to generate we can use the Nest CLI to create a new project. And I'm going to call this API because we're going to create a microservices based API. And I'm just going to go ahead and use npm. And that's going to install. And while that's installing, I'll just talk through what we're doing here today. So basically, we're creating an API gateway, which is going to be a RESTful, it's going to have HTTP access, so a client can make a HTTP request as you usually do. And then we're going to offload that to one of our microservices, and we're going to have gRPC as the transport layer. Now, if you haven't already seen my 15-minute video on what microservices are, I would highly suggest looking at that because that goes into detail. It explains the different types of transports, such as RabbitMQ, gRPC, and when to choose which type of microservice. So that's a really good video to watch, if you've never seen or heard of microservices before. But if you have, then you sort of know that gRPC, it acts slightly differently, although similar to the other types of microservices, which is why I wanted to do a special video on this one. I have done a playlist on making a Facebook Messenger microservice-based application that you can check out using RabbitMQ, and the other ones sort of behave similarly to that, but gRPC is a little bit different, and we're going to go ahead and see why that is the case. But I have created this API project here, so this should look quite familiar. This is just a basic NestJS folder structure, and of course, we're assuming that you can create a CRUD application in Nest, but if you haven't, I've got plenty of videos on the channel you can check out for that. So with that out of the way, basically what we want to do here is we want to turn this into a mono repo, because so far we've just got one project, but we want to use the microservices architecture. So we want to have an API gateway, and then we want to have a to-do microservice. So we can do this. And I've just got the Nest CLI open just to show you that when I run this command here, nestg generate app to do, this is actually going to change this into a mono repo. So what we're building today is just going to be quite simple. It's just going to be an API gateway that connects to a microservice, which is just going to be a basic to-do microservice there. But we're going to see exactly how we can hook this all up together. Oh, I forgot to actually CD into the project, so let's just go ahead and do that. Usually I'm in the project, but in this case I am not in the project. So I'm going to just delete this apps here, because I'm going to need a CD into API first, and then I'm going to run nest generate app to do. And then now you can see here, if I just close this terminal, you can see that it had a quite simple CLI here, but it got extended so that this mono repo is true, meaning that we're building multiple projects in the same area. So when you build it, you can deploy them separately, but we're able to write the code in this one spot. And we can see that it converted our API into its own folder in apps, which is going to be our API gateway. And then we got the to-do microservice there. Now, just before we get started, we're going to need to install a couple of dependencies. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm just going to run npm install. And if you've seen my microservices video, you know that you're definitely going to need NestJS Microservices. Although you don't have to watch that video to follow along with this one. But I go into more detail in that video on RabbitMQ. So in this video, we're going to focus on just wiring everything up, and all of the theory behind microservices have been covered in previous videos. So we're going to install at NestJS/microservices. We're also going to want to get gRPC. So we can get at gRPC, and then gRPC can be used with many different languages. So we're going to need to get the JavaScript version of gRPC. And then we're going to want to get gRPC-proto loader. So we're going to go into protocol buffers and proto files in just a moment. So we'll explain that. And then we're also going to get ts-proto. And if you go to the Nest documentation, you'll find these installation steps or dependencies that you need to be there. So I must have spelt something wrong. gRPC. Oh, that's a slash proto loader here. Okay, so that's installing, and let's just open the package JSON to confirm that it is doing what we want it to do. So yeah, we've got these NestJS dependencies here. So basically, we want to use the proto extension in VS Code because we're going to create a proto file. So if you come to your extensions and you type in proto, you don't need this, but I got this one here, and this just allows you to have syntax highlighting in your proto file. So let's go ahead and create a proto file, and then we're going to see where these proto related dependencies come into play in just a second. So firstly, in our next to our apps folder, let's go ahead and create a proto folder. And I'm going to actually just create a file here in the proto folder called to-do proto. And the proto file is basically where you declare your methods that you're going to call, because we're in a microservices application. And if someone makes a request to the API gateway, that's going to get forwarded to a different server, our to-do microservice. And gRPC is kind of cool because when you define the signatures, you get that type safety between the projects. And in addition to that, it can also work across multiple languages. So you can have different microservices in different languages. And that's exactly what Google sort of solved. Although we're going to have to focus in NestJS, of course, but you can imagine a large company like Google's implementation of remote procedure call, which means calling functions from your projects as if they were local, even though they're run on different servers. And that's achieved by having this proto file, which has the type safety definitions, and it can work across the multiple languages that because you can imagine in Google, they would have their, different, they might have something done in C++, and they might have something in some other language, and then they want to communicate all of those together. And gRPC was Google's way of solving that issue. So this is the main difference between the other microservices and gRPC is you've seen well, I don't know if you have seen it or not, but I have a video playlist on RabbitMQ, which acts similar to other microservices. And that effectively, you expose the service and then you call it, and you sort of import it and then call it. Whereas that's sort of happening in this case, but how it works in gRPC is you sort of define the signature, and then you sort of, rather than, calling it and unwrapping it and dealing with it, you can just call it directly. So it sort of is doing the same thing, but it sort of feels like you're calling it more locally, and you'll see what I mean as we get into it. But the first thing to note about this proto file is you need to just declare what sort of the syntax is. And I think the latest version, or the docs that I've been following, they just say proto 3 at the top. And you can see we've got that syntax highlighting there. That's sort of similar to, like, I don't know, any YAML files or maybe Docker files where you have the particular version at the top there. And this is version 3. So there's probably early versions that don't have extra, things that you can declare there. And then we go ahead and we define the package. And this sort of reminds me of Java in a little bit, where you just sort of say what the file is. So this section is the to-do section. So you just got to declare that, so then you can refer to it from other places as we need it. And then basically we want to have what's known as a service. And we're going to call this the to-do service. And we can have this syntax here where we has RPC for remote procedure call, meaning we're calling a function that's in a different server, one of our microservices. So from the API gateway, we can call this remote procedure call. So we're just going to start off basic, and we're going to have 2. We want to be able to post a to-do. And I'll come back to the type in a moment. And then I'm going to want to get a to-do, or get all of the to-dos, let's say. So basically, because we're in a proto file, not a TypeScript file, we need to have the particular type. So when we get something, we don't really need anything as a parameter, but we're expecting to return a bunch of to-dos. So this is how we can implement the type safety part, and this is a requirement to use gRPC. And it turns out that if you have no arguments, you actually just need something that says empty. And we're going to define these in a moment. And then the post to do, you can imagine the post to do is going to be different to the to do, because the post to do, you don't need the ID because you haven't generated that yet. So you'll have like a post to do DTO. So I'm going to define these, of course, but I'm just going to write the signature out here. And then basically this file is going to be bundled with all of our build projects. So if we have 2 microservices, we'll go into each of those 2 microservices, and that way we'll know how to call things, and it has the type safety, and then it uses the method from the other, or the called service, in this case the to-do service. So we can just go ahead and we can return that. And then there's just this empty code bracket here. So let's go ahead and just define this. And you define it with the keyword message. And this is just basically an interface, or a type. Now I've got this extension, so you can see these like IntelliSense coming up. So I'm just going to make the ID int32. And again, if you're familiar with TypeScript, you might be familiar with numbers, but you got to remember this isn't just for TypeScript. Yes, we're using a JavaScript layer over the top, but this can work in many different languages, and most languages actually do have integers and different types there. So we got this, we need to take into consideration that. So when we write out this proto-like interface-like thing, we just need to have that awareness. So it's pretty similar though. Like we have a string, so I'm just going to have a description equals to 2, and a boolean, which is bool, and I'm just going to say is done equal to 3. Now you might be wondering about this 1, 2, 3 thing. Basically, I'm not assigning this to a value. What this is doing is just saying what the order of the things are within here. And You could look into the documentation if you want to go ahead changing that, but it doesn't really do anything at all unless you have a specific need for that. So we've got our to-do. I just think of this as an interface with a number as an ID, a string as a description, and a Boolean is done. I don't worry about any of the low level details or anything like that because, you know, we're dealing with this level of abstraction. We don't need to. We simply just need to connect things together. So basically we're just defining our signature for our method, and we're going to define our types, and then we can call those from any microservice we want and have that type safety there for us. So let's just do to-dos, because to-dos in gRPC, basically what you want to do is you want to use this repeated keyword. So if you need an array, you use repeated, and then you can use the type there. So we've got the type to-do, which we defined above. So I'm going to call this to-dos, and again, I'm just going to equal this to 1. And then we also need the post to-do DTO. So this is going to be pretty much the same as this part here. And then this will just be 1 and 2 here. And then finally we need empty, because by default it doesn't recognize that no arguments is empty. So we need to actually specify empty as a curly bracket. And again, you need to look at the gRPC documentation. So I'm just going to take it at face value and just go ahead and just use that there. And of course, this is returns, not return. So we can save that. So now the good part is we've installed that TS loader extension, which means, because we've got this proto file, but with that extension, we can actually just go ahead and generate the corresponding TypeScript file. And we're going to generate that right next to this proto file in this to-do proto file here in the proto folder. Now, I looked at this. I got this command from the NestJS documentation. If you scroll down a bit on the documentation, there's a reference to the TS loader, which takes you to an external website, which gives you the command to generate the TypeScript file from this proto file. And the command is, oh, and one thing to note is if you're on a Mac, you might need to run brew install protobuf to be able to use it. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. Now I've already done that. I'm on a Mac at the moment. I don't think you need to do it on the Windows though. But I'm not 100% sure. npm. Oh, sorry, we've already installed things. We've got the extension. Basically what we want to do is we want to generate the interfaces and controller and the client, which is basically the method that we call from the API gateway to call those type signatures or methods that we just created, or type signature of the methods we just created. So the command is proto c -- plugin equals, and then basically you need to look at your node modules, because there's a binary file in there which has the executable to be able to do this. So we installed the package, and of course that put into the node modules, and there's a binary file in there that allows us to execute the capabilities to convert this file. So we have this -- plugin equals to the node modules. And this is, I thought this was a little strange doing it this way at first. But when I read the documentation, I realized that, you know, rather than calling a regular command, like from the command line, it's from the package in the executable files from the node modules that you installed. So that's why we're doing this plugin, like pointing to where that file is. So again, that's in the binary files. And there's something called the proto c-gen-ts underscore proto file. And to be able to execute that, basically we want to be able to, well, firstly, that this is not necessarily specific to NestJS, because NestJS has its own structure of how it does things. And because NestJS has its own structure of doing things, there's also this extra bit we need here to specify that the output will be in the NestJS format. So we have this --ts underscore proto underscore out, and the place that we're pointing towards or referencing is going to be just the folder that we're in, because we've CD'd to the base of the folder here in API. And basically, so yeah, that's where we're outputting it. Well, sorry, that's not where we're outputting it. That's where the base of our folder is. And then we can use the NestJS layer of abstraction here. So we have this ts underscore proto underscore opt equals nest j with a capital J s equal to true. And you can just put this in the location relative to this folder that we're in. So if we're in the API folder, we want to put it next to this proto file. So we can just specify that by saying we want this to go to the proto folder relative from the API folder, and we want to use that proto file there. So then we put it there, and hopefully I didn't make any mistakes, but if we run this, good, it generated this file for us here. So if we look at this here, we can see that it basically created the interfaces from our proto file here. But in addition to that, it also it came up with some things like the package name, which we need to refer to when we call some methods, and we need to implement some of these interfaces here. So we've got this client, which is what we're going to call from the API gateway. We're going to make a request to the API gateway, and we're going to need to post the to-do. And this has all the type safety, and it connects everything up as long as you wire everything up properly. Because we also got this to-do service controller, so not in that client or the API gateway, but in the actual microservice, we can also refer to these methods, and then they'll actually call it from that microservice itself. And then we just got some gRPC related things for these to-do service controller methods, which just pretty much enforces these types here. So that's all well and good, but one thing to note is that when we build the project, it won't, in its current form, actually reference this file, and that won't be part of the build. So what we need to do is we actually need to come back to our Nest CLI here, and we just need to change a few things here for the way the project bundles things together. So for this API gateway, what we need to do is we need to change the root, the entry file, and the compiler options, and we need to do the same thing for the other. You could create like a shared library and then reference it like that. And I have done that in a previous video in the RabbitMQ microservice playlist, but I just want to stick to the point, and that's focusing on connecting NestJS and gRPC. So I'm just going to simply bundle that file here into the builds of both of these API gateway and to-do projects. So basically, when you build a microservices project, each of these applications within apps, they'll be its own file or folder with files, and then you deploy those separately, or in a logical way. You might use Kubernetes or something like that, or containers. But the different servers, hence microservices, So we need a way to be able to get this file into those. And the easiest way to do that is if we just look at like one of the apps here. If we change the, so we got the entry file, we got the root here as apps/API. If we change the root to, well, actually we need to leave the root the same, but if we change the root source root to simply just the folder that we're in, i.e. this whole API folder, then it's going to bundle this proto file with us in folder. But that means relative to the source root, we'll need to change the entry file because it will no longer be main, but we have this source folder. And recall that this root is apps/API. So from the apps API root, we can just go ahead and just say source/main here. And the reason we're doing that is because in these compiler options here, we can optionally have some assets. And that's just the files that we want to include. And what we're going to do is, now that we're in the API folder rather than nested a few folder structures in, we can refer to that proto folder. And we want to get the to-do proto. So you could do that, but in a real project, you'll probably have multiple proto files. So you can just use this star.proto sort of regular expression thing. And that will get you all the proto files in that folder. And then finally, we can go ahead and we can use watch assets. And there's a description there where if you're running in watch mode, watching all non-TypeScript assets, setting watch assets is a top level compiler option. Basically, if you, by default, I think it's true, but if you send it to false, by default it's false, but we want to set it to true, meaning that if we ever decided to come back to one of those proto files, you know, and then we build our project, it'll be watching for those changes. Look at the date that the last change was done, and if it exceeds the date that it was last done, then it'll go ahead and update that for us. And that's good because we need that to be updated to be able to, you know, have the up-to-date methods that we have there. So you can see that this is pretty much all the same: entry file, source root, and compile options. The only difference is that this says to do here. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste that, and then just write to do here. So now we have our Nest CLI set up. What I want to show you is actually just building these projects. So just to show you what the output looks like. So if I run npm run start dev to do, I'll run that and then I'll just exit out of it. And I run npm run start dev API. So if I look at the dis folder in API, we see that we got these two apps. We got the API folder and the to-do folder. And if we open those up, you can see that it's got the source files for that, but it's also got the to-do proto that we've bundled it together with. So that's important because we're going to need to refer to that file there. So we just need to remember that we're going to refer to this bundled output to-do.proto file from our application, but we'll see that in just a moment. So I just wanted to show you that. Of course, we're going to need to hook up our microservices now. And this is where like the main part of this comes in. And this is actually quite familiar if you've wired up any other microservices before in NestJS, but if not, I'll show you how to do it anyway. So basically what we want to do is we want to, well, firstly, we want to go to our microservice. So the way we do this is we set up the microservice and then we come back to the API gateway. So then we can call that microservice from the API gateway. So just to show you, the API, these two folders are pretty much the same at the moment because we haven't really done anything. So if I open up the to-do, the main TS file, we got this listening on 3000, and that's true on the API gateway as well. And we want the API gateway to listen on port 3000 because we need a way to communicate to our server. But the microservice, we don't want to be able to communicate to directly, at least not in this case. Now, I did talk about hybrid microservices, and basically the main reason you want something like that is if you had some WebSocket stuff, because passing the WebSocket stuff over services, I'm not actually sure how that works. There might be a way to do that, and if there is, let me know in the comments. But I've found that hooking it up with WebSockets requires hybrid microservices, meaning you expose a port, so you'll be able to make a server client connection there, but then you also have the microservice related stuff encapsulated in microservice communication calls, so using gRPC in our case. So we don't want to be able to access that in this case though. So we can go ahead and we can just change what we're doing here. So basically what we want to do is, rather than creating something here, we want to call the create microservice function. So I won't create an API. I won't create a HTTP based API, or it's a microservice one, meaning we can connect to it with the right options within our network, but we can't connect to it directly. So basically this is going to have a type here, and this is going to be the microservice options type, and this comes from NestJS Microservices here, so that's why we installed that before. We've seen where the loader related, proto related dependencies came from, and then we're about to use the gRPC stuff in just a second to hook up the TypeScript file that the proto generated with our gRPC. And I should mention that you don't have to generate it, but you'd end up just typing all that stuff out. So just to clarify, in our to-do proto file here, of course you could type this out and you could change the names of things, and this sort of generates a bunch of things like promise, observable, and the type. Maybe you just want to choose the one and all those sorts of things. But it's much easier to just go ahead and use the CLI. It's much safer as well. But you might have some specific code quality requirements that you have, or linting rules that you're adhering to, or something like that. But yeah, we want to use this microservices options type, which takes this to do module. But then in addition to that, we can actually specify an object with any of our options. And if you've seen the microservice video before this, we need to specify the transport. So we're going to get the transport from NestJS Microservices. And if you had a different microservice, this is where you would say, okay, well, I want Kafka, MQT, Nats, Redis, RMQ, RabbitMQ, which we set up, TCP. So pretty much all of these, Kafka, MQTT, Nats, Redis, and RMQ, they're all similar, and they all connect in a similar way, to my knowledge at least. So you can check out the Facebook Messenger series if you want to use that, one of those, any of those basically. TCP, you basically, I think you would, I haven't used that. It's something you use for about an hour when you're learning about microservices, but then you realize that all of these types of things build up upon TCP to make it a lot better, make it more reliable and all this sort of stuff. So unless you go on super low level, I probably wouldn't worry about that. Or maybe it's your first time ever. If you read through the NestJS documentation for microservices, page 1, it will start to talk about TCP. And again, I talk about TCP in my introduction 15-minute video of what microservices are, so how the actual network protocols and how all that stuff works. But yeah, gRPC, the main difference is that proto file and having that type safety across projects and calling a file, a method from here as if it was local, opposed to calling an external thing, waiting for it, it coming back, and then you sort of processing it, you're acknowledging it, and all those sorts of things. So yeah, I think it sort of is doing those things under the hood, but you'll just see in a moment. Anyway, that's a long-winded way to say we can choose gRPC here. And then this itself has its own options because we need some sort of way to be able to connect from to our proto file. So, and why is this erroring? Hold on. So let's just cut this out here. Oh, it's just erroring because we haven't used it, I think. So if I go ahead and use this here, because of course we're going to need to listen to this. That gets rid of some of the errors. I'm not really sure. Maybe I need to fill out the options. So, okay. So we get the proto path because we need a way to connect to our proto file. And this is where that I showed you the where things are building, because we're considering that this is built. And then we see, so we're in this to-dos folder right now. Like we're considering that we built it. We've got this source file here. And then we've got this to-do proto. So what we need to do is we actually just need to join something here. So we can go ahead and get that from path. I might just put this up above our stuff. So NestJS stuff or JavaScript related stuff and then our stuff. So what we want to do is we just want to join. We want to get the dir name, so the current directory. And then we want to actually go back to the to-do.proto. So we're in the source folder because this is the main file that we're building. We've got this main file that we're building. We go back outside of this folder, and then next to that we got this to-do proto file here. And then that package we referenced before, you saw that was in the top of, so that's that there, that to do there. And we reference that here and we're creating the proto file. So the package is going to be to do. Now you could use environment variables if you want, and probably you should. But again, you should be familiar with NestJS before jumping into this, and all those basic things I'm just assuming you can do and tidy up. This is more just to show you how to connect NestJS to gRPC. And then of course we listen that and then we call the bootstrap function. So that's the to do, creating the microservice there. Now we can go over to the to-do controller. So the to-do controller, what we're going to need to do is recall that when we created this to-do file, it actually created this to-do service controller for us. And we're just going to go ahead and implement that. So then we can, it'll force us to use these methods here. And that's good because we'll get the type safety for it. And then everything lines up nicely. So let's delete this GET request because this isn't a HTTP based thing. What we want to do is we want to actually have a, so I might change this firstly to, I might just delete this whole thing to gRPC method, because this whole server isn't HTTP, it's a microservice. So rather than the gets and posts that you use for HTTP, we need a way to tell it that it is, you know, the microservice, gRPC, communication. So here you can say what the service is, and this sort of automatically generates for us. So we got this to-do service here. So we can just put that there. And then we need the name of the method. So let's start with the post request. And so that's going to be post to do. Let's see here. Let me verify that. Post to do. Yes, so this is just one of these methods here, but it's actually the capitalized one. So I think it just takes that and then you use the capitalized version of the particular method that you're calling. So we can say post to do. Now, the interesting thing about this is if your method is going to be called the same thing or using the same, you know, to do or post to do here. So for example, we got post to do here. This is what we'll call the method. And then it's going to take the post to do DTO, which we import, which is going to be of the type post to do TTO. So I'll make that a lowercase p. And since we're sort of enforcing this signature here, we can give back the to do here. And basically the thing about this is completely optional. I'm just leaving it there to sort of spell out what's happening behind the scenes. But if that refers to the same sort of thing, then you can omit that. And similarly, you could actually remove the to-do service as well. We can't in this case, but if you're calling this from the service and it's the same. Now we're doing this from the to-do controller, but if you were using this and the name was the same, you could omit that as well, but we're not doing that. So we have this to-do controller, and then we can go ahead and call implements to implement the to-do service controller. And then we'll also, and if you want, you could just hover over this and get a quick fix to implement the interface. So that will generate this for us here. Although I want it to be a little simpler than that because I'm going to give back a to-do. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove these. And even though technically in gRPC you have this empty request here, we don't need that in TypeScript. So it's perfectly fine if you just go ahead and delete that. And I might just cut this down below the post because we need to make a post before we can see anything. Not that it really matters. But if I go ahead, and I think I cut it into the method. If I move that here, save that's it, Prettier saves it, and then copy this gRPC thing. We're still calling the to-do service, but this time we're going to be calling the get to-dos with the capitalization. So get to-dos is returning to-dos. So now, okay, so this is throwing an error, but we want to, basically, we want to use the to-do service here to be able to hook that up. So we're just going to say here, return this dot to-do service dot post to-do, which isn't created yet, but we'll create that in a moment. And then we'll put the post to-do DTO in there. So that's just erroring because we haven't created that yet. We don't need the observable. We don't need empty. I think we can just get this from, this path looks a little long. That's all right for now. Come back to that, perhaps. So I'm just going to put the NestJS stuff together. So we need this post DTO here. Oh no, we got that. We need to-dos. Oh, I got that as well. So, oh, it's just erroring because we haven't done something here. So let's just go ahead and just copy this here. And this is going to be get to-dos. and it's going to have a empty arguments there. So basically that's all we need from the microservice. All we've done is, instead of using HTTP, we've just used the gRPC method here, and we've just implemented the interface that just got generated by the proto file that we, created all our types. And then we're going to offload the work to the to-do service here. So if we open the to-do service, basically what we want to do, we're not connecting to a database just yet, but I might connect to Prisma in the next video. So I've sort of prepared that in some of these other projects, but and I'm actually really liking Prisma opposed to TypeOrm, mainly for its migrations and well, that's one of the main things, migrations, and also ability to just view the database in the browser quite easy. So it's really, really nice. I like it. So I might make a video on that and Dockerizing that in the next one. But let me know if you want to see that. Also thinking of doing some Kubernetes locally and setting that up. Of course, when you deploy it, you usually deploy it to a cloud provider, but getting it going locally would be a good thing. And then perhaps another playlist on deployments in general. So let me know what you think of that, guys. Would that be worth doing? So basically we want to do just a local thing here. So I'm just going to have a private to-dos of the type to-do, and I'm going to import that. So I'm going to command period and add that from proto to-do. And that's probably should be the import for the other one. So I think by default it did that. And I was looking at that, it looked a little strange. Does something like that work? Okay, so that does. So that's all well and good. So, to do was the other one we needed. I knew there was something. And probably you caught that much earlier than I did. So basically we're going to have an array of these to-do objects. And let's just give us one so we can just make a GET request. So we're going to have an ID of one, a description of, whatever, first to do, is done. We'll set that to false. And then we'll just go ahead and save that there. So let's just go ahead and copy this here because it's got the same shape. So we can just go ahead in this service here, and we can just go ahead and have our, we don't need this part here, the annotation, but we can just get the signature there. So let's just go ahead and write these methods out here. So basically, let's say, well, firstly, get to-dos, that's simple. We can just return the to-dos. Actually, we need to return it like this. So you might want to modify how you do things, but when we define the file, we defined it like this. So rather than returning the array to-dos, we got this object with to-dos, and that's often a good pattern to do regardless, because you're returning JSON rather than the arrays there. So that tends to be a little better, especially when you extend APIs. But that's just a coincidence. That wasn't intention or anything like that. So let's go ahead and get to-dos. So basically what we would want to do here in post to-do is we simply just want to create a new to-do. So let's just say to-do is of the type to-do, which is going to be a to-do object, and we'll just set the ID equal to this length plus 1. So there's 1 in it already. The length will be 1, the next ID will be 2, and if we add more, they'll just be auto incrementing like that. Now description, and of course you wouldn't want to do that for real, but we're just demonstrating here with some in-memory data. So we don't have to hook up the database. We'll do that in the next video if we do that. So the post to do DTO, we can get the description there, and then we can get is done, which is going to be specified by the person. You could make that false by default as well, but we're letting the person decide. So the to-dos, we can just simply push the to-do. So it's all pretty basic stuff here. And then you can just give back the one to-do that you've created there. So I probably need to import this as well. So that's all there is to creating the microservice. So just to recap what we've done on that part, we've gone to our microservice, the main file, and then we changed it from being a HTTP exposed on a port to being exposed with this microservice here. We then have these methods, which we're going to be able to call from the API gateway, and they're hooked up to these services file, which has the logic, which is just in memory, manipulating an array and pushing an object to an array and getting those. So what we need to do now is we need to go back to the API gateway and recall that this is listing on 3000. So we don't need to make any changes to that main TS file, but we do need to connect to it. So to connect to our microservice, we can come to this import section here in this array here. And we're going to need to use the clients module, which comes from NestJS Microservices. So I'm just going to put that up there. And we just need to register that. So we need to register all of our microservices. So we've got one at the moment. And then we've got this name of to do. Again, this probably should be an environment variable. But again, this name that we've defined in the to do here. So we've got the package of to do, and then we've got the service to do service, and then there's some other things in here as well. So we got this to do here. Now, once again, the transport is going to be transport.grPC. And then the options, so I can pretty much just copy this from here. I'm going to copy these here. And we're going to need join. Recall that that's from the output in the dist folder. The source file is has the main JS file, and then if you go back one, that'll take you to the to-do proto that we've bundled together using the NestCLI JSON file configurations. So that's all you need to do there. So what we can do is we can go to the app controller and we can just call it. So this is going to be have a get and post request. So let's do our get requests. So this is going to be get to do's. So get to do's, when we hit this API endpoint of /localhost 3000, it's going to get things for us. So we can say we want to get the to-dos, and then let's have our post here as well. And the post is going to be called post to do. You can call it whatever you want, but it's going to have a request body, which we're going to need to import, which also has this thing here. And then we want to get the post to do DTO type, which is what this is. Or we want to get the object which refers to the post to do DTO type. And then we just want to return this .appService.post to do. and then pass in that post to do DTO. So the last thing we need to do is we just need to open up the app service and call that. And then I'm going to show how that all works. We're going to fire it up, make sure it all works. And then I'm just going to do a quick 1-minute recap of everything, just in case this has been too much. So we've got this app service here. So what we want to do is we want to have a constructor. And in the constructor, we want to use inject. And the reason we want to use inject is because we want to be able to get the gRPC client. So we can have this client gRPC, which is going to be of the type client gRPC from NestJS Microservices. And we're going to need inject as well. And that's because we're going to need to do something a little different to regular injection, although this is kind of not that weird anyway. But basically what we want to do is we want to, so basically what we're doing from our API gateway, we want to be able to call methods from our to-do service. So basically when we created this file, we had this to-do service client. So we're on the client or the API gateway, and we want to request methods from here, from the API gateway, but they're actually calling the methods from the to-do application. And this is all done with type safety and everything, and they all connect up. And, you know, we've defined it in the transport in here, so it connects and stuff like that, the applications. But we need a way to be able to use that client. And since it's defined in the other project, technically we need to, we have access to the proto file, but it's technically behind the scenes is calling it from the other server. So it feels like we're just calling it from this API gateway, and it feels like it's just on here, but it's actually on the other server. So what we do here is we just say, I don't know why it keeps importing from back here, but we want to be able to get the to-do service client, which got auto-generated for us, which is going to be of that type there. And then we're calling this inject method here, so we can have that service accessed in this API gateway through the microservices protocol. So we have access to that client gRPC here. And we need to tell it what we're referencing. So we know that this is to do. And basically how this actually works, or how it's going to work here, is we want to have on module init. So when this module gets created, basically we just want to set this dot to do service client equal to this dot client gRPC, which has this get service method on it. And then this is where we put our service name. So we can say to do underscore service underscore name, that got auto generated for us. And then if we want, we could just put the type in here as well, which is going to be the to do service client here. So we can go ahead and we can save that. And this is going to give us access. Well, it's going to make us feel like we can call methods from here as if they're local. So for example, post to do, we know that that's going to take the post to do DTO, which is of the type post to do DTO. And then we can simply return the method that we created. So we got the return this dot to do service client dot post to do. We pass in the post to do, and it sort of just feels like we're just calling it from here. So we're in the API gateway, we're just sort of calling this, but it's coming from the other microservice. And that's sort of the key difference between gRPC and other microservices is like if you're familiar with RabbitMQ, like behind the scenes, technically, yes, it is doing a similar thing. But you know, it sort of feels like when you do it here in RabbitMQ or something, another microservice sort of feels like you're calling it from another server. You know, you acknowledge you received it, and then all of those sorts of things. Whereas here, you just automatically get that type safety between the projects. It can work across different languages by implementing the proto file, and I think it also is faster because I think it actually gRPC. I think the way it like, because when you send requests to different servers in microservices, one of the drawbacks is you got this JSON which you need to serialize and deserialize. But I think gRPC does something clever which increases the speed of that. So it's pretty good, actually. Pretty good gRPC, and there's a reason why it's popular, which is why I wanted to do this video on it, and just because it's a little different to others, but it's also pretty cool. But yeah, so we got this to do service client here, and then we can have get to do's, and this is just simply going to be returning this dot to do service client dot get to do's, and recall that we had an empty thing that we're passing here, so we'll just pass an empty object there like that. And with that, do I need to implement that? I might need to implement that. Oh, is that lowercase? Okay, I think it's like that then. And then in the app controller here, let's just get it from the proto. So if I haven't stuffed up any of the, you know, file imports or anything like that, I should be able to, everything should just work. So I'm just wondering why this part here doesn't work. Oh, this is string for some reason. Oh, that probably said hello before. I'm just going to delete that there. All right, so let me just go ahead and run things. So let me just cd into API, and let's run a npm run start dev to do here. Okay, no errors found, that's good. And then let's run npm run start dev API here. Okay, so now let's go open Postman up. So Postman. All right, so I did my 3000, that worked. I got a post request here. Description false here. So let me do that. Now rerun this, and then that all works well and good. So we've successfully hooked up our NestJS microservices with gRPC as the transport. Let's just do a quick recap of everything that we've done here. So we created a new microservice mono repo with an API gateway and a to-do microservice. We created this proto file here, which is where we define the actual methods that we're going to call across the different microservices. Then we ran a command which generated this to-do.ts file, and that's all of our interfaces and things we're going to implement. And then, you know, we did bundle that together by adjusting the NestCLI configuration. And then we created this NestJS microservice, and we just sort of hooked it up as a microservice here. And then, you know, we have this gRPC annotation and referred to it, where we actually got the to-dos, which was just some in-memory stuff. So I'm thinking in the next video I might use Prisma and have a look at that and how that works with microservices, and also use Docker to set those up and how it all works together. And then we got the API gateway. So that's just a regular HTTP server, where we're sort of just calling the app service. So that's pretty similar stuff. And the app service, it just injects the client gRPC to be able to make the calls as if they were local. So thanks so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.